السيدات والسادة، الجلسة القادمة ستبدأ بعد 10 دقائق في مسرح الواحة. يرجى الجلوس في مقاعدكم وتحويل أجهزتكم المحمولة إلى الوضع الصامت، وشكراً.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the next session in the Al-Waha Theatre will start in 10 minutes. Please take your seats and switch your mobile devices to silent. Thank you.
أصحاب السعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السيدات والسادة، ندعوكم للجلوس في مقاعدكم. الجلسة التالية على وشك البدء. يرجى تحويل أجهزتكم المحمولة إلى الوضع الصامت، وشكرا.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the next session in the Al-Wafa Theatre is about to begin. Please take your seats and ensure that your mobile devices are switched to silent. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Could I please ask you to take your seats and ensure that all mobile devices are switched to silent? Please take your seats. This session is about to begin. Please take your seats. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Aisha Siddiqa. I'm a climate advisor to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and I'm a researcher on human rights. But today, I stand before you as a woman, as a daughter, as a sister, and as a bearer of life. As someone from a land that has been bombed again and again with the simple question, why isn't your heart broken? What happened to your humanity? What gender justice, what equitable transition, what just transition when 2,000 kilometers away from here, women and girls are being slaughtered? I know, we don't respect emotion in spaces like this. It's illogical. It doesn't move the needle. It's the thing naive activists do. And they don't really understand diplomacy. But I want to remind you, the heart is the foundation of life. And your responsibility at this convention on climate change is to life. And you are failing. You are failing. You are failing. Peace, harmony, and gentleness, love are not weaknesses or nomadic simplicity. These are the traits of our mother. These are the things that have kept us alive. It would be remiss if I opened today on gender and women without mentioning the war happening in Palestine. I dedicate this poem to the women, girls, mothers, and brave men of Palestine, teaching us what life really means. It is titled, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, by Maya Angelou. After Maya Angelou. Music is easier to make after heartbreak. So the caged bird sings, break my heart, and then break it again, so I can make a sound. Let my cage have some bells, and let the bells be broken. Let me sing when it gets dark. Let me hang from the center and sway back and forth. And when my throat fails, let the intensity of pain turn into water. And if there is no water, let my tune echo without me moving my mouth. And when the immense loneliness begins, when the world no longer listens, through the empty space between the bars, let this tune be what you have. Because I am going to love life as no one has taught you to love it. I remind everybody of the responsibility we have at this convention of climate change. I stand before you again, not just as a poet, but as an advisor to the United Nations Secretary General, as both a scholar and an activist, as a woman. Without further ado, I'd like to also offer this space to Her Excellency Razan Al-Mubarak to begin the rest of the programming. Thank you.
Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. My sister, Aisha, thank you for reminding us that indeed it is the heart that should lead us to find our common humanity. Your Excellencies, dear global leaders, women and girls here and everywhere, advocates and ambassadors, today we come together to respond to a pressing global call for action to ensure that gender equality is part and parcel of our efforts to accelerate global climate action. Because as we all know, climate change is not gender neutral. Women make up the majority of the world's poor. And despite this, and maybe because of this, women and girls are at the forefront of climate action. And this is why I am delighted and honored to announce the launch of the COP28 Gender Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership. This partnership will mainstream gender in the implementation of the Paris Agreement in 3 ways. First, by advancing gender equality through equal opportunities to decent work in emerging job markets. Second, by enabling better finance flows to women and girls in the regions most impacted by climate change. And third, supporting the call for gender disaggregated data collection. This is key. It provides a better understanding of both the impacts of climate change on women and their contributions to climate change and climate action. I am so pleased to see how the call to action launched at the Global Conference on Gender and Environmental Data just a few days ahead of COP has given us some of the building blocks to advance this partnership. This partnership holds the promise of a world that is fair, that is equitable, and that is empowering to women and girls. And I urge all state and non-state actors to collectively drive its implementation. Together with more than 60 governments that have endorsed this partnership, we can move further and faster to advance gender equality. And with that, I have the great honor and privilege to pass over the lectern to my very good friend, Ms. Sima Bahous, UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, for her keynote address. Sima, please join me in welcoming you on stage. Everybody, Ms. Sima Bahous. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, feminists, a special welcome to all young people in the room here today, to all indigenous women, to all activists for gender and climate. Let me start by thanking you, Aisha, for your beautiful poem and your beautiful words. I join you in your call for peace everywhere, for the sake of our humanity, for the sake of all women and girls in all conflicts, and for the sake of all women and girls in all the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we are painfully aware of the impacts of accelerating and intensifying climate change, deepening poverty, growing inequality, irretrievable losses of biodiversity, environmental degradation. What is spoken of far less is the ways in which these impact women and girls differently from men and boys. Consider jobs and livelihoods. Women make up the majority of the workforce in agriculture, a sector facing significant climate change impacts. Women are overrepresented in informal, low-wage, and precarious work within agriculture. They work with vastly unequal access to land and natural resources, finance, technology, knowledge, and other assets. It should be no surprise, therefore, that women's ability to respond and build resilience to climate and environmental crises and disasters is also profoundly unequal. On the other side of this coin, women are underrepresented in climate-related sectors of the green and blue economies with high growth potential. More than 80% of the new jobs expected to be created primarily through the phase-out of coal mining and coal-fired power will be in sectors currently dominated by men. Only 20% of these new jobs will be created in sectors where women are the majority. Excellencies, we know that the transition to low-carbon, sustainable economies will create jobs. That should be a good thing. But we will make it a bad thing if women, especially indigenous women, young women, and women in all their diversity, do not benefit equally from these jobs, and if that transition exacerbates inequality rather than reduces it. Here is a golden opportunity to address gender inequalities in the labor market by creating decent work in sectors that benefit women, including the care economy. We must seize it, including by ensuring that women have the right skills and are equipped to take up these new created jobs. This is why UN Women enthusiastically welcomes the COP28 Gender-Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnerships. And thank you, Your Excellency, my good friend Razan, for announcing it today. This partnership is well aligned with the enhanced Lima Work Programme on Gender and its Gender Action Plan adopted at COP25, which notes that the implementation and means of implementation of climate policy and action when gender responsive can enable parties to raise their ambition towards a just transition that enhances gender equality. A just transition must be human rights-based, intersectional, and place social protection and care at the center. Our latest paper at UN Women on the gender-responsive just transition for people and planet outlines ways to achieve both gender equality and women's economic empowerment, as well as increase and enhance quality, decent work for women. I commend it to you as a contribution to fulfilling the commitments outlined in the COP28 Gender-Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partner. Excellencies, based on our work, I will make 5 asks of you. First, I ask that you prioritize investments in the care economy for quality care jobs, services, and infrastructure. Care jobs are low-carbon jobs. Second, make climate finance mechanisms gender responsive. Currently, only 0.01%, I repeat, only 0.01% of funding worldwide supports projects that address both climate and women's rights. This is a grievous missed opportunity. Third, increase direct access to climate finance for women's grassroots, indigenous, youth-led, and feminist organizations, enterprises, and cooperatives. This is key for an inclusive and effective gender-responsive just transition. Fourth, engage the private sector, including through innovative finance mechanisms that align investments with the climate and gender nexus. This includes diversifying financing sources directly benefiting women and women-led initiatives. particularly in climate and crisis-affected contexts. Fifth, and finally, let our efforts for transparency and accountability in climate finance have a specific focus on gender equality outcomes. Our accountability must extend to women and girls equally. Colleagues and friends, I assure you of UN Women's readiness to be a catalyst and partner to support the COP28 Gender-Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership, to advance gender-just transition and climate finance in both international and domestic implementation efforts. I will conclude by echoing the UN Secretary General when he said, and I quote, "Let us accelerate our pace down that path in partnership and solidarity so that all people everywhere can live lives of dignity and opportunities in societies that are just, peaceful, and prosperous." End of quote. And I thank you. I also would like to thank my friend, Her Excellency Razan, for giving us the opportunity to be here today and to deliver this keynote address. Thank you very much for your leadership, Your Excellency. And also, I will now pass over to Her Excellency Ambassador Milan Verveer, Executive Director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. Verveer, you are my dear friend as well, and I will invite you to moderate the panel on gender-responsive just transitions. So, welcome, Melanie.
The first section of the panel that is going to discuss gender-responsive just transition and climate action. Please come to the stage. We have a very distinguished group of leaders. And thank you, Director Bahous, and thank you, Seema, for those inspiring words. How do you pronounce your last name?
Kag is okay.
Kag. You are.
Celeste, right from the island.
You're on this panel.
I am on this panel.
We're going to begin this discussion with the Minister, Jeanne d'Arc Mujawam Arya, who is the Minister of the Environment of the Republic of Rwanda. Welcome, Madam Minister.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, as the Minister for Environment, why do you think the gender-responsive just transitions and climate action partnerships is so important for Rwanda?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. This is a privilege for me to be with you today. As a former Minister of Gender and Family Promotion and the current Minister of Environment of the Republic of Rwanda, I know how climate is affecting gender. A gender-responsive response just transition and climate action partnership calls for a just transition on the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs, as highlighted in the Paris Agreement. And of course, the science has shown that women are the most affected by climate change. And women are the biggest percentage of humanity. It means we hold half of humanity. And we are the most affected by climate change. Even though Rwanda, like other developing countries, has been historically contributing role to global greenhouse gas emission, our country has been suffering serious climate change impacts, such as floods, landslides, erratic rains. Even now we are talking, it is raining heavily in Kigali. Women cannot go on the street. Men cannot go on the streets. Children cannot come out of schools. It is raining heavily. And as an example, in May this year, 1st and 2nd May 2023, the floods and landslides caused by heavy rains claimed the lives of 135 people in one night, and more than 50% of them were women and girls. But each and every life counts for us. And of course, injured members of family were not having someone to take care of, because in our culture, women are the ones taking care of the sick. The moment the woman is among the victims, the whole family is shut, is on knees. So most affected were women, of course, and this shows how there is a current need for Rwanda to build women and girls' capacities for a resilient future. Even from our constitution, women is part of the development of the country, is part of any step we make, because women holds 2/3 of the humanity. And of course, investing in education, investing in vulnerable groups, projects, programs, especially women and girls, to fully participate in leadership and decision-making position. And of course, designing gender-responsive budgeting, responsive financial mechanism, and the Ministry of Gender and Family Promotion and the Ministry of Environment are the only ministries that sit at the planning process and the budgeting process of all government institutions to make sure gender issues are cross-cutting and budgeted for, to make sure that environmental activities, environment is a cross-cutting and budgeted for, be it infrastructure, be it education, be it local government. We have to make sure that gender and environment are listening one another. Finally, designing gender-responsive financial mechanism should be in DNA of each institution, because we believe when a woman is empowered, the whole family is empowered. So if we take care of women, we take care of climate change, we include climate change in all our planning, we must make sure that women is there. Because when women is not a victim, the family will not be victim. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your compelling words. We're going to turn now to Minister Sigrid Kaag, who is the Vice Premier and Minister of Finance for the Netherlands. Welcome. Let me ask you, why was it important to the Netherlands to endorse the partnership as you have? And what work are you currently undertaking to support the advancement of gender equality through the just transition?
Well, is it on?
Yes.
Is it on? Yeah. No, thank you very much. I think the gender responsive just transition partnership is probably long overdue, so I congratulate the launch, the leadership on its timing. And we are supporting it because it's a natural next step for us when it comes to our feminist foreign policy, so to speak. And I have to give credit to Sweden because they've been a feminist foreign policy country way before the Netherlands finally came on board, but you know, better late than never. And it's about the 4 R's for us. It's about rights, representation, resources. The last R sounds very Dutch, reality check, but I would translate that into being pragmatic. Pragmatic, deliver according to circumstance and country realities, as well as sometimes cultural specificity. It's not for us to always belabor, to admonish, but we need to be quite clear as to where the national space is for the change. Now, what we will bring to it, I think, is, from my perspective, the bigger picture. Until recently, I was party leader, and I'm the first deputy prime minister in this government. I chose finance despite my foreign trade, aid, and foreign policy background, because if you want to drive change, you need to budget, you need to allocate resources, you need to mainstream, and you need to ensure it's really important. No single country, well endowed or developing, can do it all. You cannot budget for it all, you cannot pay for it all. So choices are necessary. And unless you anchor, in our case, climate action, but also gender responsive or gender rights-based budgeting, unless you anchor that from the outset in your allocations, in your decisions, it will never happen. And that was, frankly speaking, also a positive frustration, I would say, when I was Minister for Aid. It was always an add-on. It was always the marginal, whereas it should be center stage. Rights are not to be trifled with. Rights need to be allocated the resources in order to achieve the goals. So this is what we will bring in attitude to the table. We will also bring resources to the table, but ultimately I see it as my task as Minister of Finance, through climate action, gender-based budgeting, internationally but also nationally, leveraging the shareholder role we have at the World Bank, but also the IMF and other multilateral development banks, to bring that to the table. So we need to enable and facilitate the partnership to really come to its full strength. You're the advocate, you show us the way. All we have to do is make sure you're in full swing and force to deliver on those goals. One last caveat, we've had elections, as some of you may have noticed, so I do not want to backtrack. I stand with my government for as long as we're in government, but we're in for a rocky ride domestically. But this agenda holds firm, and I think all advocates, North and Global South, need to come together. Because indeed, women are 50% of the world's population. We're not a sector, we're not a budget allotment. This is a rights-based issue, and it's quite fundamental, and now is the time, it's now or never. And vulnerability is of all ages and all generations, sadly. And climate action, or lack thereof, is homing in on the vulnerability of women, girls, people of color, in Western societies, or marginalized groups or minorities in other countries. So I think it's a calling as well that we have. Thank you.
Excellent remarks. If you want to drive change, we do need resources, and we need finance ministers at the table as well. So thank you for that. We're turning now to Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, who is the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone, and the co-chair of the C40 cities. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much.
So Mayor, C40 not only looks to spur climate action at the local and national levels, but also runs programs to develop skills for women's leadership. What role does multi-level action play in ensuring a gender-just transition?
Thank you. So as you said, C40 is a network of almost 100 cities. And as mayors, We are very, very engaged in the lives of all of our residents, plus 50% of which are female. And so there are a couple of things. I mean, I think as a general policy, the fact that our new co-chair is a woman kind of shows where we're going. But going beyond that, I'll just give a couple of examples of things that C40 City does. We, in 2020, under the leadership then of Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, launched Women for Climate. It's a mentorship program which has now run in 22 cities, had 44 cohorts, and touched over 1,000 young women. And the idea is simple. Women are the most affected. Women also have the solutions. But often, they don't have the space in which they can develop those solutions. They don't have the financial resources to enable them to implement the solutions they have. So through Women for Climate, we're effectively creating a platform which allows women to apply to be part of the program, and they're given specific mentoring and leads and connections, and Freetown is one of those cities. That's one example. Another very practical example of C40's action on women was the development of an organization called Change, and that's Cities, Hub, and Network for Gender Equality. And this also has a very simple but very effective outcome or agenda. In all of our city governments, whether you're in LA, Eric Gassetti was one of the pioneers of this, or in London, or in Freetown, Accra, or Nairobi, or in Jakarta. In all of these cities, we have institutions in our city councils. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what percentage of our staff are women? How directive are we and deliberate in our policies to ensure that we, whether it's a transport policy, it's a housing policy, it's an environment policy, at the city council level, what are we doing to ensure that we are prioritizing the space and the facilities women need? And a very practical example comes from one of my mayor colleagues in Bogota, with care homes. Very often, women are caregivers, and that work is unpaid and unrecognized. And it often means that the potential of women, if you're looking after children, the aged, persons with disability, you could end up giving up your own opportunities for education, giving up your own opportunities for a career, and giving up your own opportunities for sleep. So the care blocks actually create a space, and they now have 21 of them, a space for respite, a space for adult learning, a space for just getting simple things done like health checks. And the great thing about C40 is that we work on a principle of replication. So in as much as we've got Women for Climate all over the world now, we're also now adopting the care block system. And Freetown is going to be starting our first lot of care blocks in 2024. So through policy, through example, through role modeling, C40 is telling the world that we're fighting climate, because that's what we're about. But we can't do that without having the women at the center, both in terms of leadership and in terms of opportunity.
Well, and I know you've been just an extraordinary mayor when it comes to gender-responsive climate action. So thank you for all that you have done personally. We're turning now to the Right Honorable Andrew Mitchell, the Minister of State in the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office of the United Kingdom. So, Mr. Minister, the United Kingdom has shown leadership in the advancement of gender equality through climate action, both domestically and overseas. Can you tell us why it is important for the UK to advance gender equality and build ambitious climate outcomes in parallel?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am the British Development Minister, and the thing you learn about development very early on is that unless you see international development through the eyes of girls and women, you are basically missing the point. And I'm honored to be the only man on this panel. I have to say that in the Mitchell family, everyone is a girl. Even the dog is female, so it's no new experience for me. And I am in very good company alongside some distinguished leaders in this area. We are at a critical juncture with our race towards a green economy gathering pace. We must act now to ensure that no one is left behind, because women and girls have a leading role to play in building this greener and sustainable future. And it's vital that we promote and advance gender equality to ensure that this is a just and effective transition. We know that when women participate in the management of natural resources, it results in better governance and conservation. And when they are better represented in national parliaments, tougher climate change policies tend to be adopted, lowering emissions. The evidence is clear. Yet women and girls are not being given the best opportunities to play their part. And we know that women suffer disproportionately from climate change and from conflict. They are disproportionately affected by environmental damage, often working in sectors like agriculture, which are particularly vulnerable. Along with all this, they are often enduring poor working conditions, shouldering a disproportionate amount of unpaid household and care work, and suffering from the persistent wage gap. The opportunities are unequal as well. Despite women contributing at least half of the world's food production, they own just 15% of the world's land. And UK reports highlight that women only hold around a quarter of the executive director positions in top energy companies. So I'm glad the industry is spearheading efforts to create a pipeline of women leaders in the energy sectors, because the transition to a green economy presents a huge opportunity to benefit everyone equally as workers, owners, and consumers. And that is why the UK is endorsing the gender-responsive Just Transition Pledge today. Because if we come together, we can climb the mountain ahead of us. There are many steps to take, but through endorsing this pledge, we are on the right path. The UK has already laid the foundations. 2 weeks ago, we launched the UK's new International Development White Paper, a roadmap for our efforts through to the end of this decade. And I'm very grateful to our civil society partners who provided helpful direction throughout its development. They emphasised the need for us to promote direct support to women's rights organisations. This is particularly important for international climate finance to ensure we reach those most affected by climate change. And it builds on our international women and girls strategy, which supports female leadership in the transition to a green and inclusive economy. But we must turn these words into actions, making sure everyone is brought along in these efforts, and the UK has already taken some significant steps forward. Our Just Energy Transition Partnerships are supporting moves towards clean, sustainable economies, bringing community support to these efforts, and supporting people with retraining and reskilling in order to sustain livelihoods and create new jobs. And our Transforming Energy Access platform is supporting the technologies, business models and skills needed for an inclusive clean energy transition. Ladies and gentlemen, since 2016, we have improved clean energy access for 10 million women in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. We've created 23,000 green jobs for women, supported more than 650 young African women with job placements and training in clean energy businesses, and to study for master's degrees. We must go further, coming together as an international community to raise our ambition and find concrete ways to boost opportunities for women and girls. And earlier this week, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom here announced our contribution of £1.5 billion in new climate finance. And as part of this announcement, I am pleased today to confirm that Britain will be providing an additional £40 million to the Transforming Energy Access platform to continue and expand its critical work, empowering the female leaders of the energy transition. And the UK is looking forward to hosting an international conference next year on building women's economic empowerment into green growth. So as we look to the future, we don't need a crystal ball to predict what's in store. There is no getting away from the fact that climate change and environmental damage will continue to wreak havoc in people's lives, with a particularly negative effect on girls and women. But there is plenty we are doing and can do to lessen the impact and make the most of the huge opportunities we have to steer the planet onto a greener, fairer, more equal footing. We all have important roles to play. So I'm glad we are here today to discuss the next steps, and I look forward to our future work together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, sir, for your commitment and that powerful statement. We always welcome a he for she. So happy to have you with us. We want to turn now to Ms. Celeste Drake. She is the Deputy Director General of the ILO, the International Labor Organization. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you.
Now, let me ask you, the International Labor Organization has been undertaking work to ensure that the transition to a low-carbon economy is gender just, including through a technical workshop as part of the Gender Action Plan just yesterday. And I'm sure you'll tell us about that. Can you tell us a bit about this work and why it's so important to the mission of the ILO?
Thank you for the question. I'm happy to talk about our work, and Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates and colleagues, it's truly an honor to be batting cleanup on this panel. I've heard so much that has inspired me so far. And I just want to respond to Aisha Siddiqa's comments that kicked us off today, because it reminded me that the ILO itself was born of conflict. And one of our founding principles is that there can be no lasting peace without social justice. And we are all here because we are on a path to social justice, and that includes having a gender-responsive plan for a just transition to climate change. We all know that climate change will have a profound impact on lives, on communities, on women and girls, but it will also have a profound impact on the world of work. So, for example, the ILO estimates that by 2030, more than 2% of total working time will be lost because of heat stress. 2% may not sound like much, but it's huge. It's the equivalent of 80 million full-time jobs, 80. And as we transition away from a carbon-intensive economy to try to minimize that impact, we can do so and get back that working time, but we have to do so in a way that creates more and better jobs and more inclusive jobs. And those jobs will not just happen by accident. We have to have an intentionality to create jobs for more youth, for more girls, for more women, and make those high-quality jobs with decent work, and also make sure that they are accessible to all. And we can do this. So, for example, the ILO estimates that effective climate policies could create, by 2035, about 12 million jobs in Nigeria, or 15 million jobs across Latin America. But will those jobs be available to women and men equally? Will they be gender responsive? Well, there's some elements of hope that I can point to. For example, female employment in the oil and gas sector is about 22%. But if you look at renewable energy, it's about 32% globally, including in solar photovoltaics. I can say that. It's about 40%. So we're moving in the right direction, and we must be intentional to make sure that women have equal opportunities in the jobs of the now. These are not just the jobs of the future, they really are the jobs of the now. Our actions can either further entrench the gender inequalities that everyone on this panel has talked about, or they can chart a path toward a fairer, more inclusive, more sustainable economy that addresses the needs and values the contributions of women. Just transition is about greening economy in a way that is fair and inclusive. It rests on social dialogue, social protections, and fundamental labor rights. So it creates jobs, and it creates jobs with dignity that men and women want and that will sustain women, their families, and their children. A gender-responsive just transition takes account of the fact that women face compounded inequalities in the labor market due to discrimination not just based on sex, but race, indigeneity, socioeconomic status, and others that interact with each other and complicate the world of work. So a gender-responsive just transition aims to dismantle these structural barriers that exclude women. It proactively ensures that women have equal access to training, skilling, and reskilling, and that the new jobs will require, and it addresses the need that we've heard about to provide childcare and elder care because women disproportionately are those unpaid care providers. Yesterday, the ILO hosted the COP27 mandated workshop on delivering a gender-responsive just transition. What emerged from the workshop was that it's imperative to include women in the decision-making process for a just transition so that it really does recognize not only the value they bring to the workplace, but the value of inclusiveness and diversity. Women are often active agents in their own communities. They bring the change. They possess unique knowledge, unique expertise, and skills that are related to sustainable and resilient economies, and we want to bring those expertise and skills into the workplace. Women's full participation and leadership in the process of formulating, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating just transition policies is essential for a fair, inclusive path to greener economies. And as we face this paradigm shift in the world of work, it is important that all aspects of that transition are conducted in a gender-responsive and inclusive way, from macroeconomics to climate finance to skills and education policies. We must ensure that these address the needs of women and are formulated with and by women. Climate finance should be directed towards just transition projects that directly benefit women and, again, are decided, designed, and implemented by women. To see this happening, we need to finance gender-responsive social protections and quality public services and quality public infrastructure. That includes care services and infrastructure to reduce and redistribute unpaid care work between men and women and between households and the state. As we move forward, it's imperative to translate these recommendations into a tangible action on the ground, and this is all part of the Gender Action Plan. Bridging that gap between a narrative and reality will require unprecedented commitments. Those are hard to make, but we need them. Collective engagement and bold political leadership. And to borrow a theme from this conference, action builds hope. And that's what we need. We all have a part to play in addressing climate change and ensuring that no one is left behind. There is no just transition without gender equity and inclusion, and our ambitions must be met with this action. I am fully engaged in this area as the Deputy Director General of the ILO's Priority Action Program on Just Transition, and I truly look forward to working with all of you to make this a reality. Thank you.
Well, thank you for raising those very important points, and I'm going to ask now for the second group of panelists to please come forward. Thank you. Begin with our second group of distinguished leaders. And I'm going to begin with Reem Al-Hashimi, who is the Minister of State for International Cooperation in the UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is so great to have you with us. We go way back, so this is a special reunion. Let me ask you, Madam Minister, women fill many of the UAE's most senior climate and environment roles. How can this leadership help support a gender-just transition? And why is it important for the UAE to endorse this partnership that we're discussing?
Thank you very much. Milan, Your Excellency, my friend, indeed it is an almost family reunion to see you here again. And thank you to the panelists in this forum, but also the panelists just before us, because I do believe that a lot of what was brought forward was truly case in point on how you design a development model that guarantees prosperity. And doing that without having women at the center of it is just not going to guarantee you prosperity. And so you're right to note that in the UAE, alhamdulillah, there are significant headways in terms of positions that are occupied by women. Whether it's in economy or politics, you find them take on a pretty strong role. As we have in many generations past, women have a strong presence in our community and also in our culture. And just to echo what Celeste said from the ILO, the fact that a gender-just transition from an energy perspective brings to the table a higher female representation, that's exactly the experience we've seen in Masdar, our UAE-based renewable energy company that has a program called Wiser, which I think I've seen similar faces, or familiar faces rather, who've been working on Wiser, are focused primarily on female empowerment, and their number is about 37% of their overall workforce. And so to truly unlock, to truly enable, to truly be able to reach a full potential, all resources and skills need to be brought to the table, because different perspectives and different vantage points are shared when everybody sits equally on that table. And from our standpoint here in the Emirates, it's something we've been advocating for a very long time and have been living it. And as minister who's focused primarily on development, we keep a close eye on programs that are designed also by women, because that perspective ultimately is what helps us manage and also achieve the objectives that we've set forth.
It's a good news story, for sure. For those of you who've been to several COPs, our next discussant is no stranger. Patricia Espinosa is the former executive secretary of the UNFCCC, and today she is the CEO of 1.5, a consulting firm specializing in climate change. Patricia, happy to have you back.
Thank you, Milan.
Let me ask you, you were such a strong advocate for gender-related issues in your previous role as Foreign Minister of Mexico and as Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. At the UNFCCC, you oversaw the adoption and initial implementation of the Gender Action Plan, something many of us have supported. The full implementation is, of course, still ongoing. In your new role as CEO of 1.5, what do you feel are the crucial elements that will strengthen a gender-responsive, just transition?
Thank you, Milan, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the UAE for the wonderful leadership also on this agenda, and it's just fantastic to see here two young, bright women ministers from the UAE really leading the effort. Let me start by just making a comment on the reality we are experiencing. At this COP, we had 133 heads of state and government. Only 15 of them were women. So this is a picture of the world in the 21st century that is frankly not acceptable. It's not making any judgment on anybody. It is just, I believe it shows how many barriers there are still out there for women to get to the higher decision-making levels. So we do have a lot of work. The action plan on gender within the UNFCCC, I think, was an incredible achievement. Thanks to your support and the support of so many women around the world. Now, its implementation, in the implementation, I would say we're not yet there. It is true that we have made progress in the sense that the nationally determined contributions, the national climate action plans, mostly do refer to gender, as well as the national adaptation plans. But implementation remains the big issue, remains the big question. And I would say that we need to you asked what are the issues that we need to address. I would say finance, climate finance is not getting to women. And it's not about really supporting that space of society. I think it is really about talking about opportunities, talking about building the economy of today and for the future. So I think this is one point. The other point is capacity building, and in the previous panel there was already a mention, for example, of the need to have women really get into science and technical issues to run the economy of the future. So I think we do need to invest a lot more on women capacities, building their capacities, and to enhance the role that they need to play in the transition overall, but in particular in the energy transition. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're going to turn now to Ole Tonk, who is the Undersecretary for Development Policy for Denmark. Mr. Undersecretary, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Promoting gender equality and women's rights has been an integral part of Danish development cooperation for many years. How can we ensure climate action supports women's economic empowerment?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here. And first, I really also want to thank our host country for making sure that we have this issue on the agenda, because it somehow tends to fall down when it's crunch time in the negotiations and everything is about emissions. But it's so crucial that we keep this on the agenda, and that's also why Denmark, we are very happy to join this partnership that we are discussing today. Coming back to your question, for Denmark, it's all about the rights of the women, and that's the centerpiece that we have to keep making sure that we have in our focus. And it's both rights in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights, but it's also the women's economic rights. And if you look at how we have tried to integrate that throughout our policy, it's a mainstreaming thing, but it's also thinking about how do we distribute our finances and where does the money actually go to at the end of the day, because they don't flow right now to the majority of projects that are targeted women. It just doesn't happen. So, and that's despite that we know all the evidence points that if we have that in the back of our mind, the outcomes are oftentimes more successful. So we need to change that equation. To name a couple of sectors that I believe are especially relevant in terms of climate change, Of course, the water sector, everybody talks about water in terms of adaptation. We need to do more on that. That is so crucial also for women. They are the ones who are suffering when there's no water. And if we have water for them, it frees up time that they can spend on so many other things and avoid sexual harassment, etc. Another sector is, of course, livelihood sector, the economic empowerment of women. It is so important that job is done and that we think about it because they serve the whole family. They think about the whole family in a different manner. So the impact is just so great on that. And finally, of course, as we've heard and talked about, the energy sector. When there's no electricity in a village, then the ones who suffer the most are the women. On the other hand, if we have electricity, they will have power, and the girls will be the ones who will benefit the most in their education, for instance, and it creates economic opportunities for the women who are there. And that's why we have become more and more engaged in energy access, especially in Africa, which is a huge problem these days. And then as a closing thing, I want to turn into what has been discussed and mentioned both by Seema and Celeste on how many women actually work in the energy sector. And I couldn't help thinking that women are smart. They have chosen the sector that is the future. So that's where they are engaging, especially in solar energy. And I'm sure this thing about if women are in leadership position, I couldn't help thinking also reflecting on what you said, if we had more women in the decision-making positions, would we be where we are right now at this COP? I'm not so sure. My bet would be we would be in a better position. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And it's so true, the women who have access, who gain access to renewable technology, for example, often turn those into enterprises and very successful livelihoods. So all of these issues are so interconnected. We're turning now to Geeta Rao Gupta. She is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues. Ambassador, a gender-responsive just transition cannot happen without the right financial support. We've already heard that. What steps is the United States taking to address this?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And I also want to join the other panelists in thanking the UAE presidency for your leadership on this particular topic of gender-responsive just transition. The US, I should add, is proud to endorse the Gender-Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership. Particularly, we are excited about the work to amplify locally led decision-making because we're committed to empowering women and girls as climate leaders. But they need financing, Milan, as you said. And that's where the access to financing continues to be a challenge to achieve that gender-responsive just transition. And I think there are three reasons for that. They're the root causes, which is the sort of the gender-related bias and discrimination that's baked into societies, which affects, for example, the access to education that is about science and technology. I remember when I was much younger, this is many years ago, and studying in India, it was the default that all girls went to humanities and all boys went into science. It's only if you question that you got a choice. I hope that's changing now. I see it changing, but that still hinders girls' ability to choose careers that are in the science and technology arena. They also have less access to assets. Women don't have the assets required to provide the collateral to get traditional financing, so that's another barrier. And then finally, women-led enterprises in the science and technology area or in climate-focused sectors are challenged by the low number of women in those fields, so that their networking capacity is limited, their influence is limited, and there's a relationship bias that's towards men rather than towards women. So I think it's important to understand the reasons underlying the lack of access, which is why initiatives like the Women in Sustainable Economies, or the WISE initiative that was launched by the US during the APEC Leaders Week and was highlighted here today at 11 a.m. in our session, are vital to crowd resources to address these challenges. And for those who weren't at that session, WISE is a public-private partnership with governments, private sector, foundations, civil society to bolster women's economic opportunities, and it includes efforts to increase finance flows to women-led enterprises in the sustainable economy, in the green and blue economies. And as part of WISE, the US plans to provide $10 million in support of the next round of funding of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, what's known as the WeFi initiative, that's focused on women-led small and medium enterprises in the green and blue economies that the World Bank hosts. And we're very pleased that the World Bank has announced that the next round of funding of WeFi will actually be responding to the climate crisis. So the US is proud to be one of the founding members of WeFi. We provided $50 million to help launch it in 2017, together with 13 other donor countries. And that was established precisely to provide women entrepreneurs with increased access to financial finances, markets, and networks. It operates through several mechanisms, including financial intermediaries, direct financing, capacity building, market access, networks, and policy advocacy, and the goal is to boost the financial flows. So I think the WeFi initiative, the WISE initiatives are the way in which the US is supporting the women engaged in the sectors that we're seeking to now transition to, so that they can actually participate in those.
Thank you very much for that. And lastly, but not least, most importantly, we have Akim Steiner with us. He is the administrator of UNDP, the United Nations Development Programs, and vice chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. Administrator Steiner, welcome. The UNDP's climate promise aims to ensure that climate action and transition planning is gender responsive. Can you highlight the work that you have undertaken in this work?
I can, Ambassador, and I do so with great joy and pride in joining such a distinguished group of panelists here today, and to you, Minister Reem, as a friend and colleague, also congratulations on making this an integral part of our conversation. As many of you can imagine, heading the United Nations Development Programme, when you work in 170 countries, you not only have to, in a sense, stand the test of have you thought about this issue, but can you also take it to scale? Because we can all experiment, but for 3.5 billion women and girls who are, in a sense, living in today's energy economy, in today's transitions, it really is also a matter of the here and now. So I very much embrace this challenge that I think we have all struggled with over the years of how do we empower people in decision-making process that traditionally exclude or overlook. We can put it in different ways. Women, and one example to give you a very practical one has been our commitment to work with countries on their nationally determined contributions. I truly consider these acts of national and sovereign expression of how to deal with climate change, but not only as an emission problem or financing problem, but actually as a just transition issue also within society. UNDP, with the climate promise leading up to Glasgow, already supported 120 countries as part of a consortium on their NDCs, and we worked very hard to put into the NDC templates, together with the Secretariat of the Convention, explicit questions about how would women participate, what issues about gender should be reflected on in an NDC explicitly, because how you ask a question is already how you influence the answer. I'm very proud and pleased to say that the uptake was enormous, and we have seen already in many countries through the NDCs a very different conversation emerging, not changing reality overnight, but emerging about how to answer differently the question about energy transitions. Let me take you to another example very much on the ground in our work, sadly, and let me here also echo Aisha's introductory remarks. We live in an extraordinarily painful time. Whether it is what's happening right now, just 2,000 kilometers from here, whether what is happening across the world, what is happening in Afghanistan to women and girls, just as relevant to the discussions here also about access to energy. We work in many crisis countries, and our challenge at that moment is perhaps not even a transition, it's just survival, and how climate change and access to energy becomes a matter of survival. In Yemen, we have a wonderful example where over the last few years we have in fact engaged in precisely, Ambassador, what you also referred to just now, entrepreneurship. We have trained women solar entrepreneurs. They are running the mini off-grid solar installations in a country where there is virtually no power supply anymore. And therefore solar becomes a way of actually having access to electricity. And these women have been remarkably successful. They are entrepreneurs. We train them both as mechanics and as operators of these mini grids. And they have been so successful that they've even been featured on BBC World and many other programs, because it demonstrates that women can, even in an extreme situation of a survival economy like Yemen, be central to access to energy in their community. And I take that example then from a few hundred women to literally millions of women. UNDP today is leading a consortium of organizations that is working with 21 African economies on supporting the establishment and installation of mini-grids and off-grid solar. If the program succeeds, it could enable up to 260 million people on the African continent to gain access to electricity, affordable electricity. Just imagine the extraordinary opportunities if we design this with a gender-conscious lens, what this could create in terms of access to electricity, but also entrepreneurship, income, livelihoods. And to me, these are the examples that take us very much to the front line, where women today are struggling with just transitions, with climate change in terms of its impact, but also we can create new opportunities. And a final example that really speaks to this issue also of how do we change our institutions and their ability to think and operate differently. And I have my dear colleague Seema sitting here. We are partners in crime, so to speak, within the United Nations family, on trying to constantly ask ourselves, how do we raise the level of awareness in institutions? UN Women does a wonderful exercise for all our agencies, reviewing them every year in terms of their performance on gender. In UNDP, we have translated that into something called the Gender Seal for an institution, which is a series of very rigorous testing steps where you gain a seal depending on how rigorous your gender focus and responsiveness and provisions in an institution is. Interesting enough, in many countries we work, and this was originally developed for our own offices, there are now ministries and public institutions who say, can you please do this with us and for us? Because sometimes it's not the unwillingness to act, it's the lack of understanding how you can act that actually is the key to the next door that we can open together. So just a few examples to celebrate very much the spirit in which you have brought us together here today. And Razan, also thank you very much for your warm welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Those are terrific examples, and taking this to scale could just be transformative. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask the first group of this panel to please come up on stage so we can do a photo, but also thank the whole group for their wisdom and, more importantly, for the work they do every day. So if the first group could join.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one more incredible speaker. On behalf of the COP28 presidency and the high-level champions, my gratitude and appreciation goes to each and every one of you taking the time to join this brilliant group of world leaders and global advocates at such a critical time. By endorsing this partnership on gender-responsive just transitions, you have built on decades of work led by many of your governments and organizations represented on the stage and in this audience. As the UN high-level champion for climate change at COP28, our mission is really to galvanize non-party stakeholders, including businesses, cities, civil society, indigenous peoples organizations, to support the Paris Agreement's goal and to unite their actions with the parties. But this undertaking will be moot without the authentic inclusion and advancement of women's leadership in climate action. In my current role, it's my driving mission to ensure that gender equality and women's rights are at the heart of the movement for just climate action. And that includes in the rooms where decisions are made. And with that, there is no better person to close today's segment than Secretary Hillary Clinton, who has been a lifelong advocate for women and girls. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Clinton to the stage. Madam Secretary, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Razan, and thank you all for this extraordinary day of not only panels and events and talks, but commitments to action so that we are going to leave here from COP28 inspired and challenged to do as much as we can to realize the full potential of women in the struggle against climate change. And I so appreciate this important dialogue on gender-just transition because, as you know, the panelists were just talking about the significance of what we are finally putting on the agenda of COP, the first ever COP focused on gender and health. But it's also a reminder of how we still have so much work to do. And I want to close this important session by focusing on how we move forward from here. We've had a great day of discussion. Now we need to take action together. We've heard through this discussion that among the many obstacles women face, the worsening climate crisis poses an acute risk to any hope of gender equality and economic prosperity. We know that climate change threatens women's livelihoods, their health, their safety, and in fact threatens to reverse decades of progress toward closing the gender equality gap. We know that climate change is increasing the burden of unpaid care and domestic work. Women are spending more hours of every day seeking to secure food, water, fuel. Their incomes are reduced. Their access to education and health care is being limited, and the list goes on. Part of the reason why we are seeing this so acutely is because of the COVID epidemic, which set so many women and communities back. And you know, the cruel irony is that in general, the people most affected by climate change are the ones who have contributed the least to it. But we know that women are not just victims of the climate crisis. We are a key part of solving it. When women have access to renewable electric mini grids or clean cook stoves or solar panels, it has a transformational impact on their communities and, yes, even their countries. And so the point I want to emphasize today is that when prioritized and empowered, women and girls are force multipliers in our efforts to combat climate change and build sustainable economies. Let me give you an example. The Clinton Global Initiative recently partnered with SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association of India, to launch a $50 million climate resilience fund for women. For 50 years, SEWA has brought women together, women in the informal economy, to work together for better working conditions, higher wages, access to health care. I recently traveled last February to celebrate the 50th anniversary of SEWA. I met women who make their living on construction jobs, as recyclers, as agricultural workers, as market women, as the kind of hard work outside that they and their mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers have done for generations. And I drove north into the Rajasthan desert to meet SEWA members who make their living harvesting salt. That is difficult work that involves raking the tops of ponds in the scorching desert heat. Some of the women that I met were the 7th, 8th, 9th generation of the women in their families who have done this work. They start after the monsoons in October. They work all the way through April. They are used to hard work. They are used to working all day. Now they have to get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning in the worst heat to be able to work until 10, 11 o'clock in the morning when it becomes unbearable in 50 degrees centigrade, 52 degrees as has been recorded. In addition to suffering in extreme temperatures, these salt farmers used to rely on expensive, dirty diesel to operate the pumps that they needed to complete their work. We all know that diesel is unsustainable, it harms our environment, but it's also expensive. So it ate up a major portion of their earnings because they get paid by the ton. Can you imagine out there in the desert raking salt until you have a ton and then you sell it to get paid? So together with their partners, SEWA is supplying these salt farmers with solar-powered pumps. These pumps replace the dirty diesel pumps. And not only that, at the end of the season of their salt raking and farming, they take those pumps back to their villages and use it to light up their homes so that their children can do their homework, that they can have light at night. It's a win-win. It helped to increase their profits. As I listened to these stories of hard work and sacrifice made more difficult because of climate change and particularly extreme heat, I was reminded about how hard women around the world work. Not always are we in the formal economy, but in the informal economy as well, we are often doing work not only outside the home, but inside the home, all of which has become more difficult because of climate change. And so we are working at the Clinton Global Initiative in our Women and Girls pillar to address the acute and disproportionate climate impacts on women and girls and find ways to empower and equip them to keep working, which they all want to. They're not asking for charity. They just want ways to keep working despite the heat. How do they sustain their health in the midst of that? But there are countless solutions and shovel-ready projects that need financing that women have pioneered. We really applaud the excellent decision that was made on the very first day of the COP for the Climate Impact Resilience Fund to try to increase our investment to make sure that climate financing prioritizes women. And let me underscore that this is not just a gender equality issue, though of course it is, and I am thrilled that we've had this day to recognize that. It is also an economic and climate imperative. We cannot meet our goals and the commitments being made here in Dubai unless we include women and see us as essential problem solvers in this fight. That means we have to invest in women. That means we have to listen to women. That means we have to pay attention to the ideas they have, whether they're smallholder farmers or small business women. Let's listen to what they think will work for them in order to get them better equipped to deal with climate change. So I hope on this COP28 Gender and Climate Day, we will all renew our commitments. And I hope each and every one of us will look for ways to make sure there is a gender lens on everything that comes out of COP28. You know, there have been new funds that have been created with public money, private money, philanthropic money. Let's make sure that they also look for women to invest in and the small businesses and the entrepreneurial activities that women are engaged in around the world. I started my day-to-day in the morning meeting an amazing group of women climate activists from around the world who are creating some of the answers to help us solve the problems. One young woman is working on a technology that turns bamboo into electricity. I mean, these are the kinds of creative ideas that often come from the people, very often women, who are literally on the front lines of seeing what climate is doing to them. And so I hope that this day, which was so important, is the beginning, not the end. That it is the challenge that we all accept to find more commitments about how we will include women in every aspect of our fight against climate change. The lives, the livelihoods of women are particularly threatened. There's no time to waste in addressing this urgent need. We have solutions all over the world that we have to take to scale, and many of those solutions have been pioneered by women. And so thank you for being part of this day, but let's make this day the first of many days where we all come together to ensure that women are part of the solution to dealing with the challenges of climate change. Thank you all very much.